He was so quick-witted and very vulnerable. I just thought he was the funniest, sweetest guy I'd ever met.
Ozzy, 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 Ozzy.
It's March 15th, 2024, and Sharon Osbourne is about to receive the phone call that will destroy everything she thought she knew about her husband's life, career, and the empire they built together. She's sitting in her Beverly Hills office, probably going through the usual business of managing what's left of Ozzy's legacy, when her assistant buzzes in. "Sharon, it's Dr. Richardson from Cedars-Sinai. He says it's urgent about Ozzy's test results. Now, Sharon's been dealing with Ozzy's health issues for years. Parkinson's, the tremors, the slurred speech. She thought she'd heard every piece of bad news the medical world could throw at them. But when Dr. Richardson's voice comes through that speaker, something's different. There's a weight to his words that makes Sharon's blood run cold. "Sharon, we need to talk. What we found in Ozzy's recent neurological assessments, it changes everything we thought we knew about his condition." "What do you mean changes everything?" Sharon asks, and you can hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. After decades of protecting Ozzy from the world and the world from Ozzy, her first instinct is always to circle the wagons. But Dr. Richardson doesn't back down. "Sharon, I've been reviewing Ozzy's medical history going back 40 years. The records from his early tours, the psychiatric evaluations from the 80s, even the brain scans from his ATV accident. And I need to ask you something directly. How much of Ozzy's erratic behavior was actually medical, and how much of it was manufactured?" The line goes dead quiet. Sharon Osbourne, the woman who built her reputation on never being speechless, can't form words. "Because what I'm seeing here," Dr. Richardson continues, "suggests that your husband has been medically capable of far more cognitive function than anyone realized. The Parkinson's is real, but it's recent. The tremors, the confusion, the episodes that made headlines for decades. John Michael Osbourne was actually one of the most methodical, intelligent, and creatively sophisticated artists Marcus had ever worked with. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the crowds, Ozzy was writing symphonies. He was composing pieces that would have made Mozart weep. He was creating art that transcended every boundary the music industry had built around him. But here's the twisted part. That version of Ozzy didn't sell records. The real Ozzy, the brilliant Ozzy, the Ozzy who could sit at a piano and bring grown men to tears with his compositions, wasn't marketable. He wasn't the brand they'd built. He wasn't the product that had made everyone around him rich. So they made a choice. Marcus, the label executives, even some of Ozzy's own management team, they decided to kill the artist and keep the character alive. When Dr. Richardson explains all this to Sharon, when he tells her that Marcus Webb has medical records, audio recordings, and documentation proving that her husband's greatest performances weren't his wildest moments on stage, but his most intimate moments in private studios, where he thought no one was listening, Sharon realizes something horrifying. Ozzy Osbourne, the artist, the real creative genius behind the madman mask, had been dead for decades, and she'd been married to his ghost. "Sharon," Dr. Richardson says quietly, "your husband didn't just survive everything that should have killed him. He survived something worse. He survived having his true self systematically destroyed by the people who claim to love him most." The phone goes dead, and Sharon Osbourne sits in her Beverly Hills office, staring at the walls covered with gold records and photos of the man she thought she knew, finally understanding that everything she'd built her life around was a lie. The king of heavy metal was dead. The question was, could they bring the artist back to life? Let me take you back to 1982, to a conference room at CBS Records in New York City, where the most calculated character assassination in music history was about to begin. Walter pops the tape into his player, and for the next 10 minutes, they listen to Ozzy playing a piece he called Birmingham Lament, a haunting melody about growing up poor in industrial England, played with the kind of technical skill that would have made classical musicians weep with envy. When the music stops, Walter leans back in his chair and looks Marcus dead in the eye. "How many people have heard this?" Just me and the sound engineer. Ozzy doesn't even know I recorded it. He was just messing around after everyone left. That's when Walter Yetnikoff made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of celebrating the discovery of Ozzy's hidden genius, instead of realizing they'd found something that could elevate popular music to entirely new heights, Walter saw a threat. Marcus, let me explain something to you about this business. We didn't sign Ozzy Osbourne, the piano player. We signed the Prince of Darkness. We signed the guy who bites heads off bats, who pisses on the Alamo, who makes parents across America terrified for their children's souls. That guy sells records. That guy fills stadiums. That guy makes us rich. Walter stands up and walks to the window overlooking Manhattan. This beautiful music you just played me? This thoughtful, intelligent, sophisticated Ozzy? He's box office poison. He's everything our audience doesn't want to see. He's the death of our brand. But Walter, this could change everything. This could show the world that heavy metal isn't just noise, that our artists aren't just drug-addled idiots. This could legitimize the entire genre. Walter turns around, and Marcus later said the look in his eyes was pure ice. Marcus, legitimacy doesn't sell. Controversy sells. Chaos sells. Fear sells. We're not in the business of changing the world. We're in the business of making money off the world exactly as it is. That's when Walter outlined what he called the preservation protocol. From that moment forward, any evidence of Ozzy's real artistic capabilities would be suppressed. Studio sessions would be monitored. Private recording time would be eliminated. Even Ozzy's access to instruments other than guitars would be restricted during official recording sessions. But it gets worse. Walter didn't just want to hide Ozzy's genius, he wanted to actively enhance the madman persona. He assigned a team of handlers whose job was to encourage Ozzy's most destructive behaviors. They weren't trying to help him manage his demons. They were trying to feed them. Marcus was horrified, but he was also a company man. When Walter offered him a promotion and a significant raise to oversee Project Ozzy, Marcus made the choice that would haunt him for 40 years. He said yes. Over the next 2 years, Marcus watched as they systematically destroyed every piece of evidence that Ozzy Osbourne was anything more than a barely functional rock star. Compositions were erased. Piano recordings were destroyed. Even Ozzy's own band members were kept in the dark about his real capabilities. The truly diabolical part was how they convinced Ozzy himself that his artistic instincts were wrong. Whenever he'd try to incorporate more sophisticated elements into his music, whenever he'd suggest a ballad or a complex arrangement, his own team would tell him it wasn't what his fans wanted. They made him believe that dumbing down his music was the only way to stay relevant. And it worked. The more they suppressed Ozzy's artistic growth, the more successful he became commercially. Bark at the Moon goes platinum. Shot in the Dark becomes a massive hit. The crazier the persona got, the bigger the sales numbers became. Marcus kept detailed notes of everything, partly from guilt, partly from self-preservation. He documented every meeting, every decision, every moment when they chose profit over artistry. He kept copies of the destroyed recordings, the suppressed compositions, even Ozzy's personal journals where he wrote about feeling trapped by his own success. By 1987, the transformation was complete. Ozzy Osbourne, the artist, was dead, and Ozzy Osbourne, the product, was everything CBS Records wanted him to be. Profitable, predictable, and completely controllable. The genius was still in there, but it was buried so deep that even Ozzy himself had forgotten it existed. Until 2019, when something happened that nobody saw coming. The artist was about to fight back. It's January 2019, and Ozzy Osbourne is supposed to be planning his farewell tour. Instead, he's sitting alone in a private studio in Malibu at 3 in the morning, doing something he hasn't done in 37 years, creating music that comes from his soul instead of his brand. What nobody knew, what Sharon didn't know, what his management team couldn't have imagined, was that Ozzy's Parkinson's diagnosis had triggered something unexpected. Instead of crushing his spirit, it had liberated it. For the first time since the early 80s, John Michael Osbourne was staring at his own mortality, and he realized he had nothing left to lose. The tremors in his hands made it impossible to play guitar the way he used to, but they didn't affect his ability to compose. So Ozzy started doing what he'd been forbidden from doing for decades. He started writing real music. The first piece he completed was called Letters to John, a 23-minute orchestral composition about the boy from Birmingham who dreamed of making beautiful music before the world convinced him that beautiful wasn't profitable. He followed it with Sharon's Lullaby, a piano piece so tender and heartbreaking that when he played it alone in that studio, tears were streaming down his face. For 6 months, Ozzy worked in complete secrecy. He'd tell Sharon he was going to physical therapy, but instead, he'd drive to this rented studio space and pour his heart into compositions that would have shocked the world. This wasn't heavy metal. This wasn't the Prince of Darkness. This was the artist that CBS Records had murdered 40 years earlier, fighting his way back to life. By July 2019, Ozzy had completed an entire album, 14 tracks of the most sophisticated, emotionally complex music of his career. He called it The Real Me, and it was everything his handlers had spent decades preventing him from creating. But Ozzy made a crucial mistake. He trusted the wrong person. Kevin Morrison was Ozzy's new A&R representative, assigned to help coordinate his farewell tour. Kevin seemed different from the usual industry vultures. Younger, more passionate about artistry over commerce. When Ozzy played him some rough cuts from The Real Me, Kevin's reaction was everything Ozzy had hoped for. "This is incredible," Kevin told him. "This is the most important music you've ever made. We have to get this out there. This changes everything." What Ozzy didn't know was that Kevin Morrison was Walter Yetnikoff's nephew, and Kevin had been specifically placed in Ozzy's camp to watch for exactly this kind of situation. Within 24 hours of hearing those tracks, Kevin was on the phone with his uncle. "We have a problem. Ozzy's gone completely off-brand. He's recorded classical music, he's written ballads, he's created art that completely destroys the persona we've built." Walter, now in his 80s but still ruthlessly protective of his legacy, didn't hesitate. "Kill it. Kill all of it. And make sure this never happens again." What happened next was the most sophisticated character assassination in entertainment history. Walter's team didn't just suppress the album. They launched a carefully orchestrated campaign to make the world believe that Ozzy was losing his mind. Suddenly, reports started appearing in the tabloids about Ozzy's cognitive decline. Anonymous sources close to the family spoke about his increasingly erratic behavior and troubling episodes of confusion. Medical experts who had never examined Ozzy began speculating publicly about his mental state. The genius of it was that they used his real Parkinson's diagnosis as cover for their lies. Every tremor became evidence of mental deterioration. Every moment of fatigue became proof that he was losing his grip on reality. They painted a picture of a man whose brain was failing him, which made it easy to dismiss any artistic output as the confused ramblings of a sick mind. Sharon, watching her husband seemingly deteriorate before her eyes, became their unwitting accomplice. When Ozzy tried to explain about his secret album, about the music that meant more to him than anything he'd ever created, Sharon gently dismissed it as confusion brought on by his medication. "Ozzy, honey, you're not thinking clearly. You need to focus on your health, not on some imaginary recording project." The cruelest part was that they convinced Ozzy himself that his artistic renaissance was a symptom of his disease. His own doctors, paid consultants of the record label, told him that his desire to create complex music was actually a form of cognitive dysfunction caused by his Parkinson's. By September 2019, Ozzy had stopped going to the studio. The master recordings of The Real Me were confiscated by his management team and locked away. The farewell tour was announced, framed as a heroic final stand by a man bravely battling degenerative illness. The artist was dead again, but this time they'd made sure he knew it was his own fault. For 4 years, Ozzy lived with the devastating belief that his greatest creative work was actually evidence of his mental decline. Until Marcus Webb's conscience finally got the better of him, and he decided to burn down everything he'd helped build. The resurrection was about to begin. March 22nd, 2024. 7 days after Dr. Richardson's phone call shattered Sharon's world, she's sitting in her living room with a stack of documents that Marcus Webb has just delivered personally. Medical records, audio recordings, internal CBS memos, and a handwritten letter from Ozzy that Marcus had kept hidden for 42 years. The letter, dated October 15, 1982, begins with 5 words that make Sharon's hands shake. "They're killing who I am." In his own handwriting, Ozzy had documented everything: how his handlers discouraged him from exploring musical complexity, how they rewarded his most destructive behaviors while punishing his artistic growth. "We have everything," Marcus tells Sharon. The original recordings from The Real Me. Master tapes of classical compositions from the 80s that were supposed to be destroyed. Even video footage of Ozzy playing piano pieces that would revolutionize how the world sees him. The question is, are you ready to let the real Ozzy Osbourne be reborn? Sharon looks up from the letter, and for the first time in decades, she sees her situation clearly. She's 71 years old, battling her own health issues, watching her husband suffer under the weight of a persona that was slowly suffocating his soul. She has a choice to make that will either destroy their legacy or transform it completely. "What are you proposing?" Marcus leans forward. "We release everything, not just the music, but the whole story. The suppression, the manipulation, the systematic destruction of one of music's greatest artistic minds. We show the world that Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just the Prince of Darkness. He was one of the most sophisticated composers of his generation, trapped inside a character that the industry created to sell records." "That would destroy everything we've built," Sharon says, but there's something different in her voice now, something that sounds like hope. "No," Marcus replies, "it would destroy everything they built using Ozzy's name, but it would finally give birth to everything Ozzy actually created." On April 15, 2024, Sharon Osbourne held a press conference that sent shockwaves through the music industry. Standing beside her were Marcus Webb, Dr. Richardson, and 3 of the world's leading musicologists who had spent months analyzing Ozzy's suppressed compositions. "The man you've known as Ozzy Osbourne," Sharon began, "died 40 years ago. Not physically, but artistically. What you've been watching since then has been an elaborate performance designed to hide one of the most tragic stories in music history: the systematic murder of a musical genius." Over the next hour, they played excerpts from The Real Me, the classical compositions from the 80s, and recordings that proved Ozzy's cognitive abilities were far beyond anything the public had been led to believe. Music critics who heard the materials described them as transcendent and revolutionary. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, #RealOzzy was trending worldwide. Music scholars were calling for a complete re-evaluation of Ozzy's artistic legacy. Most importantly, Ozzy himself, for the first time in decades, felt free to be the artist he'd always been inside. The Prince of Darkness was dead. John Michael Osborne, composer and musical genius, had finally been allowed to live. Ozzy Osbourne's death wasn't physical. It was the calculated murder of his artistic soul by an industry that valued profit over artistry. His resurrection came when the people who loved him most finally found the courage to tell the truth. The king of heavy metal was gone. The artist had taken his place. What other artists do you think have had their true creative genius suppressed by the music industry? The Ozzy story might just be the tip of the iceberg. Drop your theories in the comments. Smash that subscribe button for more shocking music industry exposés, and hit the notification bell because you won't want to miss what we're uncovering next.